Is it true what the draft proposal shows, that the Trump administration has softened its position, its stance on NAFTA, and changes to the treaty won't be as sweeping or as damaging to Mexico as many previously thought or expected?
Well, let me start by saying that that media coverage of this note was not exactly recognized by the administration, and they say that did not represent exactly their aim at how they want to negotiate NAFTA. But also, let me reassure you that nothing that we at the end do in NAFTA will be damaging for Mexico, because obviously there is a space for which we can do a win-win-win proposition. Some of the elements that are in that release probably reflect the general terms in which an agreement should be upgraded, modernized, or changed. But most of the time, these pieces of communication are done at a very high level of analysis, and you know always the devil is in the detail. So even each one of those elements that you read in that coverage can be extremely difficult to negotiate when you go to the specifics.
But more fundamentally, can we assume that NAFTA, that the existing treaty won't be changed in a very substantial way? That's what the draft proposal suggests.
Well, let me tell you that when you modernize an agreement, you are going to introduce very modern things, like things that didn't exist 20 years ago. So,
such as what?
Like electronic e-commerce is one of them. Like the new approach in energy, because 20 years ago, North America was not sufficient in energy sources. And today, with the discovery of shale gas and shale oil, with the energy reform in Mexico, you have really a very different world in energy today. You have, like, for instance, new biotechnological medicine that was not covered 20 years ago. So those are very important changes that are going to be, probably what you mean is that it will not be challenging or damaging for the Mexican economy, and that I can assure you, nothing that I agree on NAFTA is going to be against the interest of Mexico.
Well, that's certainly the negotiating position you're going to go in with. I would do the same thing. But let's be specific about what is going to be part of the agreement. The energy industry, oil in particular, will be part of the new treaty.
Yes.
Software, e-commerce, and technology in general will be part of the new treaty.
It will be a new approach to telecom that today is highly relevant.
Go into a little more detail if you don't mind.
But I mean, besides the areas that are new for NAFTA, what I can share with you is elements that when you hear the interviews of my colleagues in Washington, and we agree with some of those positions, like for instance, we have to strengthen the value content in North America, right, to bring production process to this region of the world, is one element. The other element that also I hear is very important for the U.S. is rebalancing of trade. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm very glad that President Trump has ordered this analysis of trade deficits around the world. Personally, as an economist, I don't agree on the approach that you should worry so much for trade deficits. But if you want to look at them, you should not look at just one country. You should look at the whole thing, because today the world is engaged in global value chains. You may have some deficits with some countries in order to try to have surplus with other countries. So when they look at this deficit, they will realize that Mexico-U.S. deficit is this size, relatively speaking, to the size of China and other countries. So at the end of the day, in trade relocation, Mexico will be willing to buy more from the U.S. We're already buying a lot. We're the second largest buyer of U.S. goods. But we can make an additional effort as long as you have supply process already in place to be able to supply to Mexico at a competitive cost.
There's a lot of interest in what will happen to the rules of origin for the auto industry. How high would Mexico be willing to go on the rules of origin from the current average of what I understand to be 62.5%?
One of the things I like about the new U.S. administration is that they are business oriented and that they listen to business. Trying to push artificially a content rule to a number that is so high to make the construction of cars not competitive is not wise. So definitely you can make an effort. Today is 62.5% in NAFTA. Probably we can push it to, what, 70? That will be a good attempt. But now you cannot go to the extreme. to ask the car industry to build in 95%, because then you make cars built in America less competitive vis-a-vis China or Europe.
But Mexico would be fine with 70.
I'm not saying a number. I think that the industry itself, the US industry and the Mexican industry should analyze their potential to increase value content. I don't think politicians are the ones to decide what to do in an industry.
What about the potential for a border adjustment tax? Right now, it doesn't seem like it has a lot of support, or at least enough support in Washington, but it could always make a comeback. Mexico has said it would respond if the United States were to impose a border adjustment tax. How would that response take shape?
There are two elements to this. First of all, your overall fiscal policy. Your fiscal reform may imply reducing your corporate tax rates. That will make competition for investments very, very deep. So Mexico has to rethink our tax policy to keep being attractive for foreign investment. That's one element. The other element is a border tax may run the risk of violating principles of the World Trade Organization. Mexico, we will maintain our right to take our complaint to the multilateral trading system.
What about the Buy America clause that the Trump administration seems to have a sincere level of interest in inserting into the treaty?
If they want to withdraw our ability to sell goods to public sector in the US, the same restrictions will apply on the Mexican side. So if they want US companies to have less access to sell infrastructure projects or other type of elements into Mexico, they will have to guarantee access on the other side. So it is very simple. You want access to my public purchases, you have to give me access to yours.
Who are you dealing with personally in the administration?
Well, the first couple of guys that are already in their position is my colleague, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross,
yes,
and Peter Navarro in the White House.
And how would you characterize your conversations with those two gentlemen thus far?
I will tell you that I really like Navarro's interview last time when he talked about making of North America a powerhouse.
I suspect you would say that.
And Mr. Ross, I just had meetings with him in Washington. Well, when a man has been so successful in his business practice, probably he has a lot to share in terms of experience. I have a lot of experience in the public sector. We are a great team thinking of creative solutions.
How do you account for the change in tone from people like Mr. Navarro, what we heard on the campaign trail, to a statement like that Mexico is part of a North American powerhouse?
Because I think at the end of the day, that's true. I mean, if through this effort, we're able to bring back $1 of investment from China to the North America, regardless if it goes to Mexico, the US, or Canada, if it goes to Mexico, automatically it will help to reduce the deficit of the US vis-a-vis the world. Why? Because Mexicans, we have a much higher propensity to consume US goods than Chinese. We buy 10 times more US goods proportionally for every dollar we export.
So that's how you're thinking of it, recapturing economic value lost to China.
Recapturing economic value that has lost from North America to other regions in the world.
What's the timeline for the beginning of these negotiations? We heard last month that the notice would be sent to Congress within weeks. Nothing's happened.
Well, you're right. I mean, Mexico already, we are in our process of consultations. We'll end up this process by May, and the US has to trigger the mechanism. What I keep hearing is that after Congress come back from recess, they will be able to notify by the end of April. And if that is the case, we may start negotiations at the end of July.
And how long do you think they'll take?
It will be in the best interest of all countries involved to make this process very efficient. Why? Because there is an election in the US in November, and there is an election in Mexico in the middle of summer. So we need to guarantee that whatever we negotiate is approved before this change in your Congress and in our presidency.
So optimistically, how many months?
6 months of negotiations, and then send it to the legislative branch for them to approve it.
The peso is much stronger now than it was several weeks ago. Is it better for Mexico to enter these negotiations with a strong peso or a weak peso?
I think that the relative strength of the peso negotiations is not an element that would change my position, I will not make long-term decisions for my country pressured by the short-term elements of an exchange rate. That will not be wise. It may be painful, but it will not be in the best interest of my country.